In contemporary society, intelligence is considered an unquestionable virtue, the key to success, fulfillment, and domination of the world. However, a sharp mind can, paradoxically, become a prison. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, in his works, challenged this romantic view of intelligence. For him, intelligence was not a blessing, but a true curse, a burden that can be overwhelming and suffocating. Intelligence, from his point of view, distances us from people, condemns us to suffering, and plunges us into a disconcerting reality where happiness seems increasingly unattainable. For Schopenhauer, the human mind, in its relentless search for understanding, ends up distancing itself from the simplicity of life. Intelligence and happiness, for him, do not go hand in hand. On the contrary, the ability to perceive the world in its entirety brings with it the weight of suffering, loneliness, and alienation. Intelligence places us at a level of consciousness that makes us profoundly aware of the fallacies of life. Imperfections, disappointments, and inequalities are revealed with painful clarity. Instead of providing pleasure or satisfaction, intellectual discoveries end up being an invitation to despair. This paradox of intelligence is cruel and challenging. The more an individual delves into knowledge and analysis of the world, the more they are confronted with the idea that life, in its essence, is full of suffering. The inevitability of death, the futility of many human efforts, the transience of things, and the fact that each human being is, in some way, solitary and vulnerable, become evident. And for an intelligent individual, this is even more distressing, as they are unable to ignore these harsh truths. They see the world not only for what it is, but for what it could be, and this vision often triggers a profound existential discomfort. Intelligence, in its relentless search for answers, ends up making the individual increasingly isolated. Over time, they begin to notice that their relationships become more superficial and less gratifying, as others cannot keep up with their level of understanding or questioning. This emotional distance creates an emptiness. Intelligent people often find themselves trapped in involuntary solitude, as their critical view prevents them from fully connecting with others. The ability to see the darker side of reality is a sharp sword that, while offering depth of perception, cuts the bridges that could connect them to others. Schopenhauer notes that, for many, intelligence can turn into a vicious cycle. The restless mind never finds rest, never settles for simplicity, and is constantly in search of more and more answers. This thirst for understanding can become a constant source of dissatisfaction. The mind, increasingly sharp, becomes less able to marvel at the small wonders of the world, those simple things that can bring pleasure: the taste of food, the smell of rain, the pure joy of a moment of leisure. For an intelligent being, these experiences may seem trivial, as the mind is always focused on what is more complex, deeper, and often more disturbing. It's as if intelligence has the power to blind us to the beautiful and simple, because we become obsessed with a broader understanding, an understanding that can distance us from daily life. Schopenhauer even argues that the relentless search for meaning and truth can, in the end, deprive us of the ability to be truly happy. He suggests that happiness for the more intelligent becomes an almost unattainable illusion, as the recognition of the fallacies of the world constantly interferes with our ability to enjoy the present. And this is where one of the greatest paradoxes of Schopenhauer's philosophy comes in. When he talks about the pursuit of happiness, it is no coincidence that he observes that the most intelligent people, those who have the greatest ability to perceive the fallacies and defects of life, are precisely the ones who suffer the most. And this suffering does not necessarily come from external causes, but from the internal battle fought by the critical mind, which is in constant confrontation with the imperfections of the world and with itself. For Schopenhauer, the pursuit of true happiness does not depend on more intelligence, but on a deep and resigned acceptance of the human condition. It is a state of mind where the individual understands the impossibility of controlling everything and learns to live with their own limitations and with the flaws of the world around them. For him, true peace does not come from the relentless search for answers, but from the ability to detach from this constant impulse and simply accept what is. This is where the secret lies. The key to happiness, according to Schopenhauer, does not reside in intelligence or knowledge, but in accepting our imperfect nature. This may seem like a renunciation of the brilliance of the mind, but in fact, it is an invitation to free oneself from the weight of constant analysis, to accept that life is finite, that suffering is an inevitable part of the human experience, and that complete answers to the great questions may never come. In the end, living an intelligent life may mean a life of constant discomfort, but living a fulfilling life can be found in the wisdom of acceptance. Schopenhauer offers us a deep reflection. What is intelligence if it prevents us from enjoying the simple things? And what is true happiness if it does not depend on intelligence, but on acceptance and inner peace? By embracing this secret, you might discover that to be truly happy, it's necessary to let intelligence rest for a moment and simply live. If intelligence, for Schopenhauer, is a sharp blade that separates us from the simple joys of life, the constant search for answers and explanations only intensifies this distancing. The human mind, in its incessant yearning for understanding, ends up getting lost in a cycle of frustration, where the questions seem endless, and the answers, when they appear, raise more questions than solutions. In a world where reason and knowledge are exalted as the greatest goods, Schopenhauer questions the true nature of happiness, challenging the ideal that wisdom leads to inner peace. For the German philosopher, happiness does not come from reason or logic, but from a state of inner tranquility that accepts suffering as an inevitable part of human existence. He observes that, contrary to what many think, the relentless search for meaning and understanding does not lead to peace, but to the contrary, it perpetuates suffering. People, driven by the idea that they must understand and explain every aspect of their lives, become prisoners of their own minds, immersed in a whirlwind of questions and existential anguish. The act of trying to explain everything, of rationalizing human experiences, can be a poison that swallows the possibility of living the present with serenity. The intelligent mind, upon perceiving the fallacies and limitations of the world, ends up becoming more and more tormented. Knowledge, far from being liberating, becomes a constant weight, revealing not only the beauties and wonders of the universe, but also its profound imperfection. This continuous cycle of disillusionment and despair results in an emotional disconnection that can be paralyzing. The mind, which once found pleasure in the search for answers, begins to get lost in a spiral of endless questions, where, in the end, no answer is satisfactory. The more one seeks to understand life and human suffering, the more the individual finds themselves immersed in existential anguish, with no apparent way out. True peace, for Schopenhauer, does not come from reason, but from accepting what is impossible to understand. It is essential to understand that there are limits to human understanding. Not everything can be explained, and this is something that, according to him, should be accepted with humility. Accepting one's own limitations is, therefore, an essential step toward achieving tranquility. The mind that insists on seeking answers to everything is, in fact, distancing itself from inner peace, as there is nothing more distressing than the desire to control the uncontrollable or find meaning where it does not exist. In his reflection, Schopenhauer not only warns us about the dangers of excessive reason, but also invites us to seek alternative ways to transcend pain and suffering. For him, art is a powerful tool that allows human beings to escape the constraints of daily suffering. Art, in general, offers an aesthetic experience that elevates the spirit, providing a pause in the incessant search for meaning. By surrendering to the beauty of a work of art, the individual can momentarily transcend their pain and achieve a sense of freedom. Among the various forms of art, Schopenhauer highlights music as the purest and most sublime. For him, music is a universal language that transcends the limitations of reason and intellect. While other forms of art, such as painting or sculpture, represent reality symbolically, music directly reaches human emotions, allowing the individual to experience moments of ecstasy, purity, and freedom. It offers a connection to something beyond suffering, a glimpse of a reality not governed by reason, but by sensation and emotion. By listening to a piece of music, for example, the listener is taken beyond the trivialities of everyday life, transported to a state of grace where suffering and anguish dissolve, even if only temporarily. Art, and especially music, provides human beings with an escape from the slavery of the rational mind. In these moments of aesthetic immersion, Schopenhauer suggests that the individual liberates themselves, if only briefly, from the constraints of the ego and the suffering it brings. By surrendering to art, the mind moves away from relentless logic and finds a way to transcend existential pain. This type of experience, where the mind is free from the demands of reason, is what Schopenhauer sees as a way to achieve inner peace. Art does not answer life's great questions, but it offers an experience that goes beyond knowledge, an experience that, in its simplicity, allows us to access a purer, less ambitious form of happiness. The pursuit of happiness, then, is not about accumulating knowledge or understanding all the complexities of the universe. On the contrary, it is about learning to accept the limits of what we can comprehend and finding peace in moments of transcendence, whether through art, contemplation, or simply recognizing that life, by its nature, is far from perfect. For Schopenhauer, true happiness is a state of serenity that can only be achieved when the mind is capable of resting, accepting suffering, and living more fully what is possible to experience without the constant pressure of reason. Schopenhauer's reflection leads us to a disconcerting conclusion. Happiness is not a goal to be achieved through more intelligence or more knowledge. It is found in the acceptance of suffering as an integral part of life, in the ability to disconnect from the incessant search for answers, and most importantly, in the art of detaching from the ego. The ego, with its incessant desires and needs, is the primary source of human suffering. When the ego is transcended, the mind finds relief, a tranquility that allows the human being to experience life in a fuller and more serene way. The final crucial aspect of Schopenhauer's philosophy involves detachment from the self, the core of personal identity and desires. For the German philosopher, the self is the main source of human suffering. He believed that as long as we are bound by identification with our ego, we will be enslaved by incessant desires and the feeling of separation from the world around us. The ego, or will to live, is constantly seeking to satisfy its needs, and this vicious cycle of desires creates continuous tension and existential anguish that never resolves. It is this constant search for gratification that perpetuates suffering, not the act of living itself. Schopenhauer suggests that true freedom is only achieved when we transcend the ego, freeing ourselves from the chains of will and desires that imprison us. This perspective aligns closely with ideas present in Buddhism and other Eastern philosophies, which also see detachment as a path to freedom. In Buddhism, the root of suffering is tanha, the incessant desire, the craving that keeps us trapped in the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Although Schopenhauer was not directly influenced by Buddhism, he understood the ego as the focus of human will, something that must be overcome to achieve peace. The philosopher believed that by setting aside the self, or at least reducing its influence, we are able to glimpse a calmer reality, where life is no longer viewed through the lens of the constant struggle to satisfy our needs. Suffering, in this way, is no longer an inevitable consequence, but something we can transcend. Freedom, then, lies in living without being bound to our egoic identity, accepting that we are part of something greater, a continuous flow of life. Without the need to control or dominate it, this detachment does not mean denying our humanity or relinquishing our individuality, but rather recognizing that our identity is not limited to our desires and needs. On the contrary, it is a liberation. From attachment to the self, to the notion that we are separate, isolated beings who must constantly seek something to fill the void. However, intelligence often puts us in a difficult position because the more developed it is, the more we perceive the fallacies, limitations, and imperfections around us. Those with a deeper view of reality often feel distant from others because their ability to see beyond appearances distances them from the majority. Thus, intelligence, instead of bringing people closer, can create a chasm between them. Intellectually advanced individuals often face the discomfort of being emotionally disconnected from others who do not share the same level of understanding or critical vision. This can result in a sense of alienation, where the mind feels overwhelmed by its own reflections and no longer connects with the simple pleasures and daily interactions of life. In this context, the search for truth and reason can become a prison, and the mind that once sought clarity now finds itself isolated, unable to make genuine connections with the world around it. This is where Schopenhauer's philosophy intertwines with the need for practices that help cultivate a peaceful mind, one capable of facing suffering and life's dilemmas with serenity. For him, true inner peace is not found in the constant search for more knowledge or intellectual recognition, but in cultivating introspection and seeking a state of calm that transcends the demands of the ego. Meditation, in this sense, is one of the practices Schopenhauer recommends, as it allows the individual to slow down the mind, abandon the incessant search for answers, and simply be present, accepting what is without judgment beyond meditation. Schopenhauer also suggested that introspection, the act of looking inward and understanding the internal dynamics of the mind, be an essential practice. Introspection allows the individual to recognize the motivations behind their desires and fears, helping them discern what is essential and what is the result of an egoic will that only perpetuates suffering. This process of self-knowledge is a path to freedom, as it enables the person to free themselves from the external and internal influences that keep them trapped in the cycle of desires and anxieties. Another practice recommended by Schopenhauer, which aligns with his view that art is a path to transcendence from pain, is aesthetic appreciation. Art, especially music, offers the individual an opportunity to escape the limitations of the ego and reason, allowing them to experience moments of pure freedom. For Schopenhauer, art is a way to capture the essence of life without the mediation of intellect or desires. By surrendering to the beauty of a work of art, the individual is led into a direct experience, free from judgment and the constant process of analysis. Art offers a pause from the incessant search for answers, providing moments of true freedom, where pain and suffering become secondary. In the end, Schopenhauer invites us to rethink our relationship with intelligence and suffering. Instead of seeing it as a blessing, he challenges us to understand that intelligence, while offering clarity, can also distance us from simplicity and emotional connection with the world. The true path to inner peace, according to him, is the detachment from the ego, the recognition of the limits of reason, and the practice of activities that allow the mind to free itself from the tensions created by the incessant pursuit of goals and explanations. Through meditation, introspection, and art, we can cultivate a calmer mind, more capable of living in the present and accepting suffering as part of a reality that, despite being imperfect, is worthy of being lived with serenity. By embracing this perspective, we can transform our relationship with intelligence, and instead of it being a burden that isolates and tortures us, it can become a tool to guide us toward a more balanced life, more connected with what truly matters. This is Schopenhauer's true secret: accepting suffering, transcending the ego, and finding, in the small things and the silence of the mind, true freedom and peace.